We gotta burn those old dinosaurs if we want energy. I have a prediction for you. Not me, Danny, who writes today's script, has a prediction for you. There will never be a female president of the United States of America in my lifetime. Woo, spicy. I think Danny wrote this before Joe Biden stepped aside and let Kamala Harris run, although, I mean, really, it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen! Although then, Marine Le Pen was supposed to win France and didn't, terribly. It's great news, though. But I don't think Kamala Harris is going to win. I think it's going to be pretty much a landslide in the other direction. Some of you might think that I'm being overly pessimistic here, or maybe I'm just not holding out much hope of living to a ripe old age, but it's neither of those things. I'm actually just trying to improve the chances. The optimistic approach hasn't really panned out very well so far. Loads of prominent voices have been predicting a female US president ever since Victoria Woodhull arguably became the first woman presidential candidate in the 1872 election, although it actually turns out that she wasn't technically old enough. Can you imagine the people back in 1862 being like, whoa, this is great. Look, there's a woman women can't even vote. And one of them is running for president. They'll be like, by the turn of the century, at the latest, there'll be a woman president. Literally 150 years later. Nothing. Her nomination was still ratified, and she went on to pick up 0 electoral votes and a percentage of popular votes that was so low it was never officially recorded. One guy in Texas angrily insisted that he definitely voted for her, though, so Victoria will always have that. One single vote. Things looked a bit more promising in the 20th century when Margaret Chase Smith became the first woman to run for a major party's nomination in 1964. It's nearly 100 years later. Come on. Albeit an unsuccessful nomination campaign for the Republican Party. Later, in 1972, Shirley Chisholm made history by becoming the first ever black candidate to throw her hat into the ring for a major party, and the first woman to seek a nomination from the Democratic Party. Yet, despite the many notable predictions that we would see a female US president by the year 2000, the closest is back in 1872, they were by the year 1900. It's still nothing. The closest is probably Hillary Clinton, right? It's Hillary Clinton, who became the first woman to actually secure a nomination from a major party in 2016. The problem with Hillary Clinton is, unlike Bill, she just doesn't seem very likable. You're kind of like Bill Clinton. Hey, Bill Clinton! He's like a dude! Today's episode is brought to you by one of my absolute favorite sponsors, and that is Vessi. These shoes arrived about an hour ago. The FedEx man dropped them off. Every time with Vessis, I see it's a big Vessi box. I open it up. I get excited. These still smell fresh right out of the box. I am going to leave my current pair of Vessis that I'm wearing here at work today, and I'm going to wear these home. It's like, when you go to a shoe store and you're like, yeah, no, I'm going to wear them out. And you just drop your old shoes in a bin or something. That's what you'll be doing with Vessi, because they're just fantastic shoes. These are the Courtside Classic. I don't know if I mentioned that. These are new. They look fantastic. Like all Vessi shoes, they are 100% waterproof thanks to their use of the material Dymatex, which it's not water resistant. You can you literally go up to here in water and you'll be fine. Plus, did I mention they look really cool? I think I did mention that. Look, get these new shoes from Vessi. You will love them just like any Vessi shoe. Head over to vessi.com/blaze to get an automatic 15% off your first purchase at checkout. Don't miss out on staying cool and dry with Vessi. Thank you to them for sponsoring. And now back to today's episode, which I don't know is something I particularly want in a president. I mean, what do I care? The president's kind of important for every country because he's America's really big. But Hillary Clinton just, I don't know, she doesn't have those electable vibes. I did think, in the bookies odds of who will be the next president at the time of recording, or maybe a week ago, is I was definitely before Joe Biden dropped out, because it was Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and then Michelle Obama. And I was like, Michelle Obama's not even running, yet they've got her fourth likeliest to be president. And I'm like, yeah, Michelle Obama's got those electable vibes. She's, unlike Hillary Clinton, who doesn't. Michelle Obama, you could be like, yeah, she could be president. I see that. Cool. You might still remember how that went down. Hillary Clinton's, yes, we do. But the US is going about all of this wrong. Instead of trying to make positive, progressive predictions, you should take a few tips from the doom-mongering UK. Take Margaret Thatcher, for example. Back in 1973, the then UK Education Secretary participated in a BBC TV show called Val Meets the MPs, in which she was given a polite grilling by a gang of young, posh children who spoke in nice BBC accents. The kids from the rougher side of town obviously weren't invited, as who knows what kind of questions they might have asked. Yes, and as we all know, pause should just not be involved in the political experience of the UK. I'd like to go back to be a landowner if you wanted to vote. One of the posh kids asked Thatcher if she fancied the job of Prime Minister, but Thatcher's response to the children was crushingly negative. She said,
"I don't think that there will be a woman Prime Minister in my lifetime."
But you did it, Margaret, and it went so well. Everyone loves you. I mean, you're dead. No one does because you're dead, and no one did during the time. I mean, some people did, but you weren't very popular. I can't imagine that this answer would have been particularly encouraging for either the girls or boys in the audience. For the boys, you'd be like, dope, double my chances. The women aren't even competition. Yes! Women will never get a chance because men are all shit. Yeah, shit, but still PM, baby!
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
Yet Thatcher managed to prove herself completely wrong by becoming the first UK female Prime Minister just 6 years later in 1979, a position she held for over 11 broadly successful, if utterly divisive years.
Just like a woman.
Yeah, but it is one of those things. Like, I heard this quote that it's like, if you lived through Margaret Thatcher, I'm going to butcher this, you don't like her, but if you didn't, then you do. Like, you benefited from what she did, because she, closed the mines and people were like, oh, you can't close the mines. And it's like, well, now, good news, we're not really mining in the UK anymore, which wouldn't have been a good economic decision long term. Yuppies loved her. Coal miners, not so keen. Had she lived a little longer, she would have also seen two further UK women prime ministers follow in her footsteps in 2016 and 2022, but Thatcher might have missed the entire premiership of Liz Truss if it had clashed with an afternoon nap. So it sounds like the odds are improved if you make gloomy predictions which then go on to be happily proved wrong, instead of making encouraging predictions which leave everyone feeling disappointed and cheated. Still, it makes you wonder if Thatcher was the right woman for the job, bearing in mind that she clearly didn't know what she was talking about in 1973, but plenty of others have dared to make bold historical predictions which have ultimately proven to be way off mark, and I confidently predict that you won't have heard of some of them. It's a medium good tease of the episode, isn't it? Yeah, some stuff we're covering in the video today you'll definitely have heard of, so skip ahead or just turn off, whatever, I don't give a shit. Danny, we have to care! You've never heard of any of these. They're all gonna be a surprise to you and blow your mind. Stay tuned, soy face! Rocket Man. In 1959, the US Postmaster General made an extraordinary statement after witnessing an event which he believed to be of historic significance to the entire world. Arthur Summerfield informed a packed crowd, quote, "Before man reaches the moon, mail will be delivered within hours from New York to California to Britain to India or Australia by guided missiles. We stand on the threshold of rocket mail." I've actually made a video about this previously, and spoiler alert, it's pretty expensive to send mail by rocket. And he hadn't just gone a bit dizzy after licking too many stamps. He had just seen the future with his own eyes. The concepts of using rockets to deliver your mail had been floated as early as 1810 by German author Heinrich von Kleist, but it wasn't until the 1920s that serious attempts were first made to get the idea off the ground. Later, in 1934, German rocket engineer Gerhard Zucker traveled to Scotland to conduct early, largely doomed experiments with rocket mail, which often resulted in the rocket exploding before they had a chance to empty their sacks. I just saw that Chinese rocket that accidentally launched. It was like part of their space program or whatever, and they're like, oh no, we set it off early, and it's just like careening down, like falling down, boom! Quite fun to watch, but I'm sure really expensive. There was no one died. Good news. This eventually led to him getting deported back to Germany after the government described him as a threat to the income of the post office and the security of the country. And that was the last time that the government apparently gave a shit about what the post office was up to. However, a rather more successful attempt was made in the US in 1959 when a cruise missile housing 2 USPS canisters of mail instead of the traditional payload were launched from the submarine USS Barbaro off the coast of Florida and made a triumphant landing at the Navy Auxiliary Air Station in Mayport near Jacksonville about 22 minutes later. By landing, it's a cruise missile. Even if it doesn't have explosives on board, it travels real fast. And if it's going to be slamming into the ground real fast, isn't shit going to get, like, really fucked up? The Postmaster General himself had been on hand to help load the canisters, which contained no less than 3,000 identical commemorative postal covers, all later successfully sorted and delivered to the recipients. Well, I guess they were destroyed. How about that? There was obviously nothing in the mailbag for normal folk, as the VIP recipients were all cabinet members, governors, federal officials, Supreme Court judges, and the like. It'd be so cool to have one of these. I'd love to buy one of these and frame it, because it's just such a weird bit of history, and I love all that shit. President Eisenhower naturally got one. Postmaster Arthur Summerfield appeared to be incredibly enthused by the outcome, adding, "This peacetime employment of a guided missile for the important and practical purpose of carrying mail is the first known official use of missiles by any post office department of any nation." But his earlier prediction was very much destined to get lost in the post. As man would take his first step on the moon just a decade later, while the US would never again experiment with rocket mail. You would imagine that this was partly down to the fact that the whole idea was hugely impractical and expensive and unnecessary. Back in 1959, it was already relatively cheap to send mail overseas quickly and securely without much risk of losing thousands of items of mail in an explosion. I mean, yeah, because there can still be an explosion, because the cruise missile's got, even if it doesn't have an explosive on board, it's got loads of fuel, which, I mean, it comes out the back of a rocket, it's explosive. But you wonder if the postmaster was reading the exact same telegram as everybody else involved in the operation. This was never about sending nice commemorative postal covers to important people. During the icy grip of the Cold War, this was a show of strength orchestrated by the Department of Defense, which demonstrated how the US were now capable of launching staggeringly high-precision missiles across hundreds of miles. Wait, so this wasn't it? It was just a show thing. I do wonder, like, why money is being wasted on this. And next time it might contain something a little heavier in every sense of the word than a couple of canisters of mail. Whilst I hope that the Postmaster General enjoyed his grand day out with the US Navy, I'm not sure he realized that he was only ever helping to send out one particularly chilling message, and that was to the Soviet Union. Naughty Hitler has learned his lesson. Oh no, I've heard of this. This is appeasement, right? Or it's like, oh, we'll just give him those and he'll go away. Back in 1923, the leader of the relatively new Nazi party crossed a line over an incident which helped propel him into the international headlines for the first time. The Beer Hall Putsch was a violent attempt by Adolf Hitler to seize control of Munich by force, but the failed power coup ended only in the deaths of 4 police officers, 1 bystander, and 15 Nazis. This is the thing. He gets remarkably little time in prison for this, which is to essentially try to take over a country, and people died because of this. How did he not go to prison forever? Like, I feel like if this was in the UK back in the day, they'd fucking hang you for treason.
He's not all bad. Hitler just needs someone to believe in him.
In the immediate aftermath, Hitler ran away to the countryside for a couple of days like a big old chicken, but was later arrested and found guilty of treason, which is a major crime. Like, when you think of big crimes like murder, genocide, treason. But he got off lightly. He was sentenced to 5 years in Landsberg prison, but was released after serving just 9 months for treason. During his comfortable stint inside, he was reportedly treated with respect and courtesy by the prison officers and took the opportunity to start writing Mein Kampf while he could enjoy a bit of peace and quiet. However, the New York Times had good news in a genuine article printed on December the 21st, 1924, which ran under the quite breathtaking headline, "Hitler Tamed by Prison." The reporter observed, Adolf Hitler, once the demigod of the reactionary extremists, was released on parole from imprisonment at Fortress Landsberg today and immediately left in an auto for Munich. He looked a much sadder and wiser man today than last spring when he appeared before a Munich court charged with conspiracy to overthrow the government. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised, because if you go to court charged with conspiracy to overthrow the government, I feel like that's when you'd be like, oh, fuck, I'm gonna get shot in the head. And then he's like, yeah, 9 months later you're out. That's when I'll be like, they released me. There must be some mistake. His behavior during imprisonment convinced the authorities that he was no longer to be feared. It is believed he will retire to a private life and return to Austria, the country of his birth. Well, that's all right then, isn't it? I was beginning to think the cheeky scamp might end up becoming something of a troublemaker.
Ja, und mess mit the girl, und you get the Hitler!
No, the good news is we never heard from Hitler again and everything was fine. in another timeline which doesn't exist. To be fair, he did indeed eventually return to Austria in 1938 during the annexation of the country, where he was accompanied by 4,000 bodyguards, but I don't think that he had any thought of retiring to a private life at that point. It's fiercely debatable what would have happened if the New York Times had been correct in their prediction. Some have argued that the Nazi Party would still have led a deeply unstable Germany into war, and may even have had a better result without a hopeless strategic knucklehead at the helm. That's why traveling back in time to kill a young Hitler could be considered a very bad move, as you'd have no idea what fresh hell you might unwittingly be unleashing. But it's all too easy to get predictions about war and peace completely wrong, as the UK Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain discovered in 1938 when he landed back home after a productive meeting with then German Chancellor Hitler. It's like, yeah, you can have the Sudetenland and then just don't do anything else, all right, Big H? And Big H is like, no, I'm good, dude. I'm gonna take more you dickhead, Neville. Chamberlain proudly declared that he had returned from... I even know this before Dan even said it, peace in our time. And he's waving that white piece of paper around. It's like, no, Neville, no! Chamberlain proudly declared that he had returned from Germany with peace for our time. Sorry, not in our time, for our time. Less than a year before a clearly untamed Hitler invaded Poland. A couple of decades earlier, in August 1914, German Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II had informed his troops it's about to venture out to the front line of the First World War, that he'll be home before the trees have fallen from the leaves. No. And we're none the wiser today. In December 2021, Ben Hall, the Europe editor of the Financial Times, confidently predicted that Russia would never invade Ukraine, as this would risk heavy Russian casualties and would run counter to Putin's preference for subterfuge and plausible deniability. Yes, but the whole history of Russia is like, they don't mind a little bit of blood. And by a little bit of blood, I mean a lot of bit of blood. After he was proved wrong just a couple of months later, many political commentators, including American political science researcher Richard Hanania, predicted that the invasion would be over in a flash, as Russia's vastly superior military force would quickly crush Ukraine with little political interference from a disinterested West.
You sound stupid!
That did surprise me. I was like, Russia versus Ukraine shouldn't really be a question. It's like, Russia's so unbelievably incompetent. It's like, you're a massive military power and you can't even... Can you imagine, like, Russia versus a militarily powerful country? It's just they've embarrassed themselves so hard in Ukraine. It's like, it's a bit ridiculous. Putin himself is reported to have shared similar sentiments, but the leaves still seem destined to fall from the trees for at least one more time. Silicon snake oil. Clifford Stoll sounds like a man who usually knows what he's talking about when it comes to tech. The American astronomer, author, and teacher who likes to be called Cliff used to... What was his name? Well, Clifford. It's like, okay, is it unusual? No, he's just called Cliff. He's just Cliff. Cliff's his name. He is Clifford. Cliff's short for that. Big Red Dog. Used to work as a systems administrator at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in the 1980s, during which time he set up a honey trap operation which successfully ensnared a KGB recruit who was attempting to breach US military security. But Cliff didn't seem to care much for the fledgling internet, and this was something he banged on about quite a bit in his 1995 book Silicon Snake Oil and his accompanying article in Newsweek entitled The Internet? Bah! Oh, Clifford, you big red dog, you are so wrong. Cliff felt that internet shopping was entirely feasible, but wouldn't really catch on. His reasoning was that women like to go out of the house, like to handle the merchandise, like to be able to change their minds. Cliff would just be like, women be shopping! That's Clifford's argument against the internet. Women be shopping.
Touch those tie silk curtains and I'll turn one of those hoop earrings into a septum ring!
That's obviously in sharp contrast to men who like to stay indoors at all times, never touch anything, and stubbornly stick to their original wrong decisions. I mean, yeah. And he also noted that his own local shopping mall did more business in a single afternoon than the internet handled over an entire month, which was probably true back in 1995, but perhaps betrays a little lack of vision that the e-commerce economy could potentially grow in years to come, say to the tune of around, I don't know, $6.3 trillion with a T? Trillion! 1,000 billion! 6,300 billion. It's a lot of money. I bet Cliff's local shopping mall isn't exactly doing quite so well these days. Clifford Stoll also argued passionately that computers in classrooms are just expensive toys, dismissed the idea of telecommuting as a practical concept, predicted that digital books would never take off as using one would feel like an unpleasant chore, and complained that surfing the web is a clunky process which leaves him lost in a twisty maze of cross-references. Sounds like old Cliff got a little bit demented in his brain. I got lost on the internet. Reading books is wonderful. I don't like screens. It's just a bit like, dude, you've literally watched technology advance your whole life. You're not it's like people who are like, oh, AI can't do anything. And it's like, well, yeah, it's a bit now. There's definitely things that it's pretty at. But oh boy, is it going to get better. For an encore, he also made the following bold predictions. No online database will replace your daily newspaper. Video on demand will remain a dream. I don't believe that phone books, newspapers, magazines, or corner store video stores will disappear as computer networks spread. Nor do I think that my telephone will merge with my computer to become some sort of information appliance. It's like, just take everything that Cliff has said, flip it on its head, and invest in those stocks, and you'll do extremely well. Well, he was pretty much wrong on all fronts there, and it's been a long time since I last saw a corner video store. I used to work in one for 3 years, but I don't think they'd be interested in looking at my CV today. No, they're not there anymore, are they? Come to think of it, it's also been a long time since I last saw a paperboy or a paper girl, but maybe that's just because I don't get up early enough in the morning. No, it's not. I don't think it's a thing anymore. I think people just read the newspaper on their iPads. That's just normal. I guess you do see newspapers for sale. Who the f*** is buying a newspaper? Fair play to Cliff, though. He later held up his hands to his long string of ill-conceived prophecies and feels that he may have learned from the embarrassing experience. When reminded of it, yet again in 2010, he revealed, "Of my many mistakes, flubs and howlers, few have been as public as my 1995 howler. Now whenever I think I know what's happening, I temper my thoughts." You might be wrong, Cliff. Cliff sounds like Cliff. Respect. That's like owning it in the best possible way. And I admire that. Legend. And in Cliff's defense, he might have got at least one thing right. He warned that the internet could become a wasteland of unfiltered data as every voice is heard cheaply and loudly without the need for editors or publishers. It doesn't sound 6 trillion miles away from the cyberspace of today, relentlessly pumped with fresh ignorant opinions and misleading information and blatant lies and fake news. If only someone had warned us about this. The self-cleaning house. Meet the Dobsons. I used to know a family called the Dobsons. They're a fictional family living in the fictional
Oh, that's fun.
Metropolis, I think, of Tottenville in the year 2000 AD, and we were introduced to them in a 1950 edition of Popular Mechanics to help illustrate what a typical day would look like in 50 years' time. Written by Waldemar Camperfoot, the science editor of the New York Times, the article predicts a future in which factories are largely automated, the weather is accurately predicted and indeed controlled, whilst power plants are fueled by the sun. What? And by witchcraft as well? We gotta burn those old dinosaurs if we want energy.
No.
But after Mr. Dobson had travelled to work via his own private helicopter, shame I was hoping for at least a jetpack, what does his wife Jane get up to? Women be shopping! Well, she obviously gets busy cleaning the house like any good housewife, but it's a different kind of housework to anything that would have been recognised by the inquisitive readers of 1950. All Jane really has to do is switch on the interior hoses and let the house of the future clean itself. Very wet house of the future. Hang on, though, wouldn't everything get just a bit wet? Well, yes, but it doesn't matter, because Waldemar Camperfoot envisions as a future which all furniture is made of synthetic fabric or waterproof plastic. Sounds extremely comfortable, doesn't it? Oh, yeah, just sleeping on my plastic bed. Whilst things like tablecloths and bedding are now considered to be disposable items which are chucked in the incinerator after 1 year. It's the 1950s. They did realize this environment stuff. Not so outlandish. I think Simon already lives that kind of life. Jay, steady. Steady. Someone washes my bed sheets. I'm not incinerating them every time. Somehow they turn clean. After everything in the house has been thoroughly cleaned by the detergent in water, which later runs down drains discreetly situated in the middle of the floor, all Jane Dobson has to do is give everything a quick dry with the house's handy hot air function, and then she's free to toss off the rest of the day down at the bingo. It does seem strange the Capper doesn't believe that the synthetic household of the future will contain anything remotely valuable or prone to water damage, but maybe he was onto something. In 1984, Francis Gabe of Newberg, Oregon, received 68 individual patents for his own prototype for a self-cleaning and drying home, on which she had spent the previous decade perfecting at a total cost of around $50,000 in today's money. I know that sounds like a lot, but didn't we say it was over 10 years? Prototype over the previous decade. So she basically spent $5,000 a year. It's a couple of $100 a month over 10 years. It's not that much money. It's probably going to be a bit shit. Inspired by a hatred of housework, Frances created a dishwasher-style system in her home which could be activated with the press of a single button. The full washing cycle took around an hour, as everything in the house was first sprayed with soapy water from sprinklers in the ceiling and then rinsed off with clean water before the jets of warm air dried everything off nicely. The subtly sloping floors in the house would channel this dirty water into drains that led outside, passing through the dog kennel so a Great Dane could also grab a quick wash if he was in the mood. What in just dirty runoff water? And Frances got around the problem of protecting her furniture and possessions by covering absolutely everything with plastic sheets, including her furniture, books, and countertops. Do you not see the problem with this?
No.
It makes you wonder if just getting out the mop might have been a bit easier in the long term. Sadly, the very rare visitors in Ms. Gabe's self-cleaning pad noted that the system was prone to comical malfunctions, while the entire house stank of musty mildew. A financially struggling Frances lost all her patents in 2002, and following her death in 2016, the only self-cleaning house in the world was sold to a family who decided to remove all of these silly, giant dishwasher elements. Still, at least somebody out there had been listening to Waldemar Camperfoot. Perhaps the most telling point about his original article, in which the husband flies to work via private helicopter, is that Camperfoot couldn't quite bring himself to imagine that a woman might be doing something other than housework in the year 2000. As it should be! Am I right, Peter?
12 seconds later.
Why? Why keep kicking me in the dick?
He might have considered that a bit far-fetched, though. I mean, what else were women going to do? Get a job as Prime Minister? Not in my lifetime. Oh, God. Thanks for watching. The women aren't even competition. Yes!